Part 1, Chapter 4, Section 24. Cutting off pieces from the scene of action. Very often in a game, a master only plays to cut off, so to speak, one of the pieces from the scene of actual conflict. Often, a bishop or a knight is completely put out of action. In such cases, we might say that from that moment, the game is won, because for all practical purposes, there will be one more piece on one side than on the other. A very good illustration is furnished by the following game. Example 54. Played at the Hastings Victory Tournament, 1919, 4 knights. White, W. Winter. Black, J.R. Capablanca. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Knight C3, Knight F6, Bishop B5, Bishop B4, castles, castles, Bishop takes C6. Nimzovich's variation, which I have played successfully in many a game. It gives White a very solid game. Nimzovich's idea is that White will in due time be able to play F2 to F4, opening a line for his rooks, which, in combination with the posting of a knight at F5, should be sufficient to win. He thinks that should Black attempt to stop the knight from going to F5, he will have to weaken his game in some other way. Whether this is true or not remains to be proved, but in my opinion the move is perfectly good. On the other hand, there is no question that Black can easily develop his pieces. But it must be considered that in this variation, White does not attempt to hinder Black's development. He simply attempts to build up a position which he considers impregnable and from which he can start an attack in due course. D takes C6. The alternative, B takes C6, gives White the best of the game without doubt. D3, Bishop D6, Bishop G5. This move is not at all in accordance with the nature of this variation. The general strategical plan for White is to play H2 to H3, be followed in time by the advance of the G2 to G4, and the bringing of the Queen's Knight to F5 via Knight C3, E2, G3, F5, and Knight C3, D1, E3, F5. Then, if possible, the King's Knight is linked with the other knight by placing it at either H4, G3, or E3 as the occasion demands. The White King sometimes remains at G1, and at other times it is placed at G2, but mostly at H1. Finally, in most cases comes F2 to F4, and then the real attack begins. Sometimes it is a direct assault against the king, and at other times it comes simply to finessing for positional advantage in the endgame after most of the pieces have been exchanged. H6, Bishop H4, C5. To prevent D3 to D4 and to draw White into playing Knight D5, which would prove fatal. Black's plan is to play G7 to G5 as soon as the circumstances permit in order to free his queen and knight from the pin by the bishop. Knight D5. White falls into the trap. Only lack of experience can account for this move. White should have considered that a player of my experience and strength could never allow such a move if it were good. G5. After this move, White's game is lost. White cannot play Knight takes G5 because Knight takes D5 will win a piece. Therefore, he must play Bishop G3, either before or after Knight takes F6 check, with disastrous results in either case, as will be seen. Knight takes F6 check, Queen takes F6, Bishop G3, Bishop G4, H3, Bishop takes F3, Queen takes F3, Queen takes F3, G takes f3, f6. A simple examination will show that white is minus a bishop for all practical purposes. He can only free it by sacrificing one pawn, and possibly not even then. At least it would lose time besides the pawn. Black now devotes all his energy to the queen side, and, having practically a bishop more, the result cannot be in doubt. The rest of the game is given so that the student may see how simple it is to win such a game. King g2, a5, a4, king f7, rook h1, king e6, h4, rook f b8. There is no necessity to pay any attention to the king's side, because white gains nothing by exchanging pawns and opening the king's rook file. H takes g5, h takes g5, b3, c6, rook a2, b5, rook ha1, c4. If white takes the proffered pawn, d takes c4, b takes c4, b takes c4. Black regains it immediately by rook b4. A takes b5, c takes b3, c takes b3, rook takes b5, rook a4, rook takes b3, d4, rook b5, rook c4, rook b4, rook takes c6, rook takes d4, resigns.